Today in Ancient DOS Games, we're taking a look at Home Alone. Yeah, not even DOS computers were spared a rendition of this game, as pretty much every console at the time got something related to the movie of the same name, with some of the games being better than others, as many of them were surprisingly different from each other, although the majority of them weren't all that great. This one for DOS isn't bad, but it's incredibly short. It can be beaten start to finish in about 10 minutes once you know what to do, and there's not enough variety to keep it interesting past that. Now, you can certainly try for faster and faster clear times. To that end, this is going to be a pretty short episode, though there is one thing we can discuss with this game to help pad things out, and we'll get to that particular topic in a bit. The DOS version of Home Alone was developed by a company called Manley Associates, who were later bought up by Electronic Arts and turned into EA Seattle, and was published through Capstone Software in 1991. It's a one-player action game with support for EGA, Tandy, MCGA, and VGA graphics running at 320 by 200 resolution with either 16 or 256 colors. Curiously, this is one of the few games which provides separate selectors for MCGA and VGA 256 color graphics, which makes me wonder if there really is a difference between the two modes, or if they just did that to reduce confusion for those not familiar with the fact that VGA is fully compatible with MCGA. In terms of audio, it supports the PC speaker, Roland MT32, Tandy 3 voice, and AdLib cards. As for its current release date, it's still commercial and virtually impossible to find. I don't think this particular iteration of the game got a wide-faring release. I'd actually played it back when I was a kid, but it's one of a handful of games I had no idea how I got a hold of, and ultimately lost. I eventually came into possession of a loose 5¼ inch disc more recently, but without the manual, getting past the copy protection can be interesting. Unfortunately, the way it's done, you pretty much have a 1 in 26 shot at getting past it just by guessing, so sooner or later, it'll work. I'm going to skip on having a story section, but just a quick refresher for anyone unfamiliar with the movie. A kid by the name of Kevin McAllister, played by a young Macaulay Culkin, is accidentally left home alone as the rest of his rather large family takes a Christmas trip across the ocean to Paris. However, a pair of burglars, Harry and Marv, have been raiding various homes around Kevin's neighborhood and are planning to target the McAllister home due to its huge size and potential wealth. Kevin manages to scare the burglars into thinking the family's still around, but they ultimately figure out that Kevin's the only one there, and decide on a specific time to break in. Kevin's able to eavesdrop on their planning, and with foreknowledge of the impending break-in, decides to booby-trap the entire house in order to try and catch these crooks once and for all. So yeah, the gameplay is extremely straightforward, and happens in two parts. The first part is the hour before the burglars arrive, which goes by 1 minute for roughly every 6 seconds of real time. Actually slightly longer, so you have a little over 6 real minutes to grab and set up as many of the 28 objects as you can. Once the clock strikes 9, you now have to deal with Harry and Marv as they attempt to enter the house from opposite sides, and your goal is to make them give up by injuring each of them in 10 unique ways. If either of them catch you, it's game over. With two important exceptions, each object functions in one of 3 ways: as a floor trap, a falling trap, or an entry trap. Floor traps are things the burglars will step on which harms them, such as marbles or roller skates. Falling traps can fall on the burglars when they're positioned underneath, such as a bowling ball or a baseball bat. But to trigger them to fall, Kevin needs to shoot them with his BB gun, as they won't function automatically, at least here in the DOS version. There's also some entry traps, such as a barbecue starter and a blowtorch, which do function automatically, but only if Kevin is nearby, so as to goad whoever's nearby into missing that the trap is there. The two exceptions to the regular traps are the BB gun and tarantula. The tarantula will roam back and forth on whichever floor you set it on, and helps to distract the burglars. The BB gun can be used to temporarily stun the burglars to get around them, or is also needed to spring the falling traps. Both of these objects can work multiple times and thus can count as strikes against each burglar, making them both really important. Actually, I should point out too that it's impossible to win without the BB gun, so you absolutely need to make sure you get it before the trap setting phase concludes. During the actual burglary phase, you always know where Harry and Marv are throughout the house, as it shows which room they're in, and if they spring a trap, it'll tell you which one. If the location they're in turns red, they'll start moving faster because they're just one room over, and if their sprite disappears from the top status window entirely, it's because they're in the same room you're in. And that pretty much covers most of the gameplay. And there's one more thing to go into, but before we do, I quickly want to point out an interesting dichotomy. This game uses a number of still images pulled straight from the movie to set the tone of everything going on. Now, normally this practice comes across as lazy, especially when used as frequently as they are in this game. But what's interesting about this is if you set the game to EGA or Tandy mode, instead of just doing the lazy thing and dithering everything, the graphics are actually redrawn to some degree to fit the 16 color palette better, resulting in 16 color graphics which aren't terrible and actually feel like proper graphics to some degree. I don't know, I just wanted to point that out since it's a weird case of having both no effort and lots of effort at the same time. So the controls in this game are responsive at least, but they can get pretty clunky during the trap setting phase. And during the actual burglary, the controls are fine, since all you have to worry about is move, shoot, and jump. But extra controls are thrown in for dealing with traps, and that's where things get annoying. First, something to point out is that the game doesn't have joystick controls. Instead, you use the arrow keys or numeric keypad to move or go through openings, and you can choose from 4 different pairs of keys to use for jump and shoot. Those pairs being the keypad 0 and enter keys, the keypad 0 and plus keys, tab and spacebar, and surprisingly, Z and X. Naturally, you're going to put your hands on the keyboard and feel like Z and X works best. Here's the tricky part. In order to deal with traps, you need to use F1 to pick up an object, F2 to cycle through the objects you have, F3 to drop an object or set a trap, and spacebar to cancel a very specific window which comes up if you try to pick up an object while having too many in your inventory. Also, keep in mind that some of the objects you need to get can't be obtained from the ground. You have to jump and pick them up in mid-air. It's not exactly easy to do with any of the potential jump and shoot button combos. So really, the best way to play this game, at least with DOSBox, is to abuse the heck out of the DOSBox key mapper. I'll have some extra details on how to best to do this in a moment, but in terms of playing on real hardware, you'll just have to get used to the controls being a bit weird like this when setting up the traps. Yeah, we're already pretty much done. This game is super short and not very challenging. There's nothing really that wrong with the game, just awkward controls and barely any replayability given its length. All that said, it's probably one of the better Home Alone games to come out, as many of them were even more awkward than this one. Plus, as far as I can tell, this DOS version is super rare. So I'd say it's a good one to collect for, and if you do get a copy, give it a try for sure, just don't expect to want to play it for very long. You want to set cycles to max for this game in order for it to run its best. Plus, you'll want to make a couple changes to the joystick settings if you intend to use a joystick or gamepad. No, the game doesn't have joystick support, but that doesn't stop you from adding joystick support to a game using the DOSBox key mapper. Let's set the joystick type to FCS so that directional pads and hats will work properly, plus turn off button wrap as you'll need 5 buttons to assign, where button wrap forces a limit of 4 buttons. One other thing to keep in mind is that the game has a very specific use for the spacebar for if you pick up too many items, regardless of what you set your controls to. But one of the control schemes you can select for jump and shoot are the tab and spacebar keys. So if you set your controls to work in that manner, the joystick button you assign to spacebar will act both as a shoot button and as a button to advance the pop-up for collecting too many items. Anywho, that's all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Again, short episode due to a short game. Episode 216 will be on Saturday, July 1st, and as for which game we'll be covering, well, you know how people complain about having turret sections in shooters nowadays? Imagine a game that's nothing but a turret section. Yes, such a thing existed for DOS, so if you think you know what it might be, then be sure to send your guess to adg@pixelships.com, and stay tuned as we see if this was even a good idea or not.
Thanks for watching, everyone, and extra special thanks to those of you supporting me on Patreon. Here's just a small sample, you guys.